Welcome to Sacred Sleep Whisper, a sanctuary where dreams and healing intertwine to guide you toward profound peace. Tonight, I invite you to embark on a transformative journey inspired by the mystical energy of Saint Germain's violet flame. This sacred flame is not just a symbol, it's an inner light capable of transmuting pain, fear, and shadows into clarity, freedom, and serenity. As we step into this story together, allow the violet flame to envelop your mind and heart, helping you release what no longer serves you and opening the doors to restorative sleep. Before we begin, find a quiet space where you can sit or lie down comfortably. Close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath in, feeling the air fill your lungs with calmness. Now exhale slowly, letting go of any tension or worries. Feel your body relaxing, starting from the tips of your toes, moving upward through your legs, hips, back, shoulders, and finally your head. Imagine yourself surrounded by a gentle, protective glow, the violet flame, purifying your thoughts, soothing your emotions, and illuminating your path forward. With each breath, visualize this flame growing brighter within you, filling every corner of your being with warmth and peace. Now let me ask you, have you ever felt that your past still holds power over you? That unresolved memories or lingering fears might be quietly affecting your present, even keeping you awake at night? If so, tonight's story was written especially for you. It's about Elijah, a man who spent much of his life running from the shadows of his childhood until the call of the violet flame brought him face to face with his deepest wounds. And just like Elijah, perhaps you too are ready to confront what binds you, to transform it into light, and to awaken renewed. This tale begins in the vibrant yet mysterious city of New Orleans, a place where history whispers through cobblestone streets and magic lingers in the air like the scent of jasmine after rain. Elijah, now 29 years old, lives a monotonous life among dusty antiques, carrying unspoken burdens from his youth. But everything changes when long-forgotten dreams return, dreams of a radiant violet flame pulsating under starlit skies. Alongside these visions comes Lyra, the guardian of the stars, whose wisdom and guidance lead Elijah to rediscover forgotten truths and hidden strengths. Through sensory-rich landscapes, from moonlit parks to shadowy desfiladeros, you'll walk alongside Elijah as he uncovers fragments of his past buried within objects, scents, and sounds. Together, you'll explore how confronting our deepest fears isn't about erasing them but embracing them, transforming their weight into something meaningful. The violet flame grows stronger with each step Elijah takes, and within you as well, as you realize that the shadows exist only to be illuminated. Tonight's story is more than just a narrative, it's a mirror reflecting your own potential for transformation. Just as Elijah learns to embrace his journey, may you also feel empowered to face whatever lies within you. Let the words carry you, let the violet flame guide you, and trust that even if you drift off to sleep, your subconscious will continue to absorb its healing essence. Are you ready? Let us begin. The first time Elijah dreamed of the violet flame, he was 9 years old. It was a night like any other, the cold autumn wind whistling outside the modest house where he lived with his mother. He huddled under the covers, trying to ignore the muffled voices coming from the other room, his mother and stepfather arguing again. But as soon as he closed his eyes, the world changed. In the dream, Elijah stood in a dark field where the grass dissolved into cosmic dust beneath his feet. Above him, the sky pulsed with lights that danced like liquid auroras, and right in the center, there was a violet flame burning with supernatural intensity. It emitted no heat nor consumed anything. It just shone, pulsing like a living heart. A voice, soft as the wind between the stars, whispered in his ear. "The shadows are not to be feared, Elijah. They exist to be illuminated. He woke up with his chest heaving. The room plunged into silence. For a moment, he felt a faint warmth inside him, a remnant of the dream. But soon reality returned, bringing with it the distant sounds of real life. Since then, the dreams repeated themselves. Always the flame, always the voice, always the feeling that there was something he needed to remember. But childhood turned into adolescence, and the dreams became vague echoes in his mind. Now, at 29, Elijah was a man trapped in a colorless life. He worked in an antique shop in New Orleans, surrounded by objects that carried stories that did not belong to him. His days were monotonous, his thoughts haunted by memories he tried to forget. He never spoke about his childhood, about the nights spent listening to his mother's muffled screams, or about the day he decided never to return home. But that night, after years of silence, the dream returned. This time, the flame shone, and Elijah felt an invisible force pulling him forward. Around him, fluid shadows lurked, moving like formless creatures. Fear crept up his spine, but before he could react, a figure emerged from the violet light. A woman with radiant skin and hair flowing like stardust. Lyra, the guardian of the stars. Her eyes were like distant galaxies, and when she spoke, her voice was familiar, as if she had been there from the beginning. The time has come, Elijah. The past can no longer imprison you. He tried to ask what that meant, but before he could form the words, he woke up. The clock beside the bed read 3:33 a.m. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the sensation of the dream still alive inside him. But this time, something was different. A subtle pulse in his chest. A call. Outside, through the window of his small apartment, the night sky seemed to shimmer with a slight violet hue. And Elijah knew that something was about to change. As the first rays of dawn mingled with the shadows still dancing in the twilight, Elijah wandered the silent streets of New Orleans. The cool morning air carried a subtle scent of jasmine and dew, awakening in him long-dormant sensations. Each step echoed on the damp stone sidewalks, a soft crunch that blended with the distant sound of a saxophone, as if the city whispered secrets in a nostalgic melody. Turning into an alley flanked by historic mansions, Elijah realized that the city was not just a backdrop, it was a living character. The weathered facades told stories of times past, while the orange light from the street lamps reflected in the dusty windows, creating patches of brilliance that seemed like brushstrokes from an invisible artist. The contrast between the modernity of urban sounds and the weight of history imbued the atmosphere, inviting him to delve deeper into this world of memories and mysteries. It was then that he felt Lyra's presence again. Emerging between the shadows and the faint light of dawn, she seemed to float with ethereal grace. Her silver hair swayed gently in the breeze, and her eyes, deep as distant constellations, reflected the wisdom of the skies. When she approached, the soft sound of her voice echoed, mingling with the distant murmur of the river that cut through the city. "Elijah," she said in a tone that was both comforting and enigmatic, the city breathes stories. Every street, every corner holds a secret of the violet flame. As they walked side by side, the two lost themselves in a conversation that seemed to transcend time. Lyra described the mystical past of New Orleans, where ancient traditions and rich with modernity, creating a rich and complex cultural tapestry. She spoke of the scent of incense burned in small chapels hidden between alleys and the sound of hurried footsteps of souls, like him, seeking to release traumas through the subtle touch of the violet flame. At every corner, the sensory details intensified. The bitter taste of freshly brewed coffee in a small cafe, the rough touch of the brick walls, impregnated with time, and the rhythmic sound of drums echoing from a distant party. Elijah absorbed it all, feeling that, Through these stimuli, the city called him to reconnect with forgotten parts of himself. It was as if the smells and sounds formed a mosaic, each piece indispensable to completing the image of his own healing. However, not all was peace. Among the charms and mysteries, the wandering shadows still lurked, representing the fears and traumas he had tried to bury. In a narrow street, where the silence grew denser and the breeze carried a peculiar chill, Elijah felt a presence that sent shivers down his spine. They were the wandering shadows, subtle manifestations of his old fears. But this time, he was not alone. Lyra squeezed his hand, conveying a reassuring sensation, as if her touch was the very essence of the purifying violet flame. "Do not fear them," she whispered as the two moved away from the shadows, heading toward a park where the lush greenery contrasted with the gray of memories. There, the song of the birds mingled with the sound of the nearby stream, which flowed gently between the trees, and the earthy scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. In this setting of peace, Elijah could feel the warm, comforting touch of the sun caressing his skin, as if each ray dissolved a bit of the weight of the past. As they sat on an old wooden bench, Lyra looked into Elijah's eyes and said, "Transformation begins when you allow the light to penetrate even the darkest corners. Every sound, every smell, every touch, they are part of your path to liberation." Her words echoed in Elijah's mind, awakening in him a new determination. He began to understand that this sensory journey was not just a trip through the city, but an inner journey where each detail of the environment helped him face and transform his pains. As they parted, with the sun already higher and the city vibrating with life, Elijah felt that he had taken an important step in his healing journey. The world, with all its sounds, smells, and textures, now seemed an ally, a universe unfolding to reveal the hidden beauty in the small things. And amid this sensory symphony, he knew that, with Lyra by his side, he would be able to transform the shadows of the past into a light that would guide him toward a freer and fuller future. The following morning arrived with a golden sky over New Orleans, but for Elijah, the sunlight seemed filtered through an invisible veil. He still felt Lyra's presence, the sweetness of her voice intertwined with the distant song of a nightingale, the citrus scent of the orange trees in the market next to his antique shop. But along with these sensations came the unsettling presence of the wandering shadows, entities representing the fragments of his past that were not yet healed. He tried to ignore the heavy sensation in his chest as he opened the shop. The shelves were filled with artifacts that carried stories, rusty pocket watches, hardcover books with yellowed pages, mirrors that had reflected centuries of gazes. The smell of aged wood and candle wax was comforting, but that day, something was different. When he ran his hand over an ornate mahogany box, a shiver ran down his spine. A whisper echoed in his mind, as if the object itself was imbued with forgotten memories. He opened the box slowly, and inside he found a silver necklace with a small amethyst pendant, the same stone that glowed in the violet flame of his dreams. The moment he touched the cold stone, a vision invaded his mind. He saw a boy, himself, at 9 years old, hiding under the kitchen table while his mother cried, clutching an identical necklace. His breath quickened. The shadows around him seemed to move, as if something inside him was breaking. The shop door opened with a delicate tinkle of the bell above it. A woman entered, dressed in a long purple shawl and her hair braided with golden ribbons. Her eyes, deep and penetrating, fixed on him as if seeing through his soul. "You've already started to see, haven't you?" she said, her voice carrying a slight Caribbean accent. Elijah blinked, confused. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, approaching slowly, and taking the necklace from his hand with a gentle touch. "My name is Marisol, and I know what you're facing." There was something in her voice that made Elijah feel at ease, even though his heart was still racing. The scent of incense and herbs lingered around her, as if the very air was impregnated with ancient energy. "I don't understand," he began, but she raised her hand, interrupting him. "You don't need to understand now. Just feel. The amethyst. It belongs to your mother, doesn't it?" Elijah's chest tightened. "Yes," he murmured, "but I thought it was lost." Marisol tilted her head slightly, her eyes darkening. "Nothing is truly lost. It just hides until we're ready to find it again." Elijah swallowed hard. Something inside him told him that Marisol was not there by chance. She knew about the dreams, about the shadows, about the violet flame. "Do you know Lyra?" he asked hesitantly. Marisol's lips curved into an enigmatic smile. "In a way, yes. Lyra is part of the path. But there's something you need to understand, Elijah." She looked at the amethyst between her fingers. "The past you buried won't simply disappear. The shadows only exist because there's something in them that you haven't faced yet." He felt a lump form in his throat. "And how do I do that?" Marisol took his hand, placing the necklace back in his palm. "You need to go back to where it all began." Those words echoed inside him like thunder. Go back to where it all began. The house where he grew up. The place he had avoided for 2 decades. The home that held the muffled screams, his mother's sad eyes, the echoes of the past. Fear whispered in his mind, but something stronger began to emerge. A spark of courage, fueled by Lyra's presence and the call of the violet flame. He knew what he had to do, and he knew the wandering shadows would be waiting for him. The following morning arrived with a golden sky over New Orleans, but for Elijah, the sunlight seemed filtered through an invisible veil. He still felt Lyra's presence, the sweetness of her voice intertwined with the distant song of a nightingale, the citrus scent of the orange trees in the market next to his antique shop. But along with these sensations came the unsettling presence of the wandering shadows, entities representing the fragments of his past that were not yet healed. He tried to ignore the heavy sensation that clung to his chest as he arranged some antique clocks in the shop window. But the reflection in the glass distorted the bustling street outside, and for a brief second, he saw a shadow moving behind him. His own reflection seemed displaced, almost lagging in time. A shiver ran up his spine. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. "It can't be real," he murmured to himself. But deep down, he knew it was. That night, Lyra appeared in his. But the setting was no longer the same peaceful starlit field as before. Now, Elijah found himself standing on the edge of an endless chasm, enveloped by a sky that swirled in violet spirals, as if the very fabric of reality was unfolding before him. On the other side of the abyss, Lyra waited. Her silhouette shimmered amidst the glistening mist, and when she extended her hand, Elijah felt the violet flame burn within him. To cross, you must free what you still carry in your heart. He looked down and saw the dark void of the chasm. But then, something emerged from the darkness, the wandering shadows. This time, Elijah saw them more clearly. They were personifications of the past, memories of pain, abandonment, guilt. His stepfather's voice echoed among the shadows. "You were never strong enough." The image of his mother appeared next, her eyes filled with tears, whispering, "You left us behind." Elijah felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. Fear consumed him. He couldn't simply ignore these shadows. He had to face them. But how? When he opened his eyes, waking up suddenly, he still felt his breath coming in gasps. The room was dark, but the bluish light of the moon filtered through the curtains, casting elongated shadows on the floor. And then he realized the wandering shadows were there, moving on the walls, in the mirror, inside him. Elijah's first reaction was to recoil, but a memory of Lyra's voice surfaced in his mind. They are not to be feared. They exist to be illuminated. He took a deep breath. With his hand over his chest, he focused on the warm, pulsating heat of the violet flame within him. He felt it expand, filling every corner of his soul. The shadows writhed, resisting. But as he allowed the light to flow, the figures dissolved like smoke in the wind. Then he understood. It wasn't about fighting the past. It was about accepting it. The next morning, Elijah left his house feeling different. For the first time in years, the fog inside him seemed to have dissipated a little. The shadows still existed, but now he knew he had the power to transmute them. He found Lyra by the river, where the water flowed lazily, reflecting the golden hues of the morning. The scent of damp earth and the gentle murmur of the river created a sense of peace. "You have begun to understand, Elijah," she said, observing him with a kind gaze. "But the journey is not yet over." He nodded. He knew he was only at the beginning of something greater. And for the first time, he was ready to move forward. In the following week, Elijah noticed that something inside him had changed. The dreams of the violet flame became more vivid, and the echoes of the wandering shadows seemed less frightening. But in the waking world, the battle was not yet won. The city also seemed to respond to this change. The smells, the sounds, the colors, everything intensified. He found himself noticing details he had previously ignored. The sweet scent of freshly made pralines at the corner of Royal Street, the delicate tinkle of bells in a mystical artifact shop, the rough texture of old wood under his fingers as he worked in the antique shop. But the newly found peace would not last forever. The wandering shadows still lurked, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. On the afternoon of a cloudy Tuesday, an unusual customer entered Elijah's shop. He was a tall man, wrapped in a dark overcoat, his eyes hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. His presence brought a chill to the atmosphere, as if the very air around him became denser. "You have something that belongs to me, Elijah." Elijah's heart raced. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're talking about." The stranger approached the counter, removing a leather glove and revealing a pale hand with bluish veins. When he touched the wooden counter, the entire shop seemed to shudder. "The shadows told me you've begun to awaken. But there are still secrets you don't know." Elijah instinctively stepped back. "Who are you?" The man smiled, and time seemed to slow down. "My name is Alden, and I am a guardian of the shadows." That night, Lyra appeared to Elijah, this time outside of his dreams. He was sitting on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, when he felt the warm breeze change, bringing with it a faint scent of lavender and incense. When he turned, she was there, enveloped in the soft light of the violet flame, her eyes reflecting the glow of distant stars. "You met Alden," she said without preamble. Elijah nodded. "Who is he?" Lyra sighed and sat down beside him, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. "He was one of us, a guardian of the flame, many years ago. But Alden made a pact with the shadows, believing he could control them. Instead, he became part of them." Elijah felt a shiver. He said, "I have something that belongs to him." Lyra looked at him seriously. "You have something he fears, the ability to transmute darkness." The revelation made his heart race. "So, he came to stop me?" Lyra took his hand, and for a moment, Elijah felt the pulse of the violet flame within him, warming his skin. "He came to test your strength, and if you're not ready, he could drag you into the shadows with him." That night, Elijah did not sleep. He felt that a choice needed to be made. Run or face on. A accept his gift, or continue living as if nothing was happening. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of the violet flame. It was not just a symbol of transformation, it was the very essence of rebirth. And he would not run. He would fight. The following night, Elijah felt the air change even before he saw Alden. He was in the antique shop closing the register when the lights began to flicker. The familiar scent of burning incense dissipated, replaced by a dry, metallic chill. The sound of cars on the street seemed to fade, as if the world was receding. When Elijah looked up, Alden was there, standing in the middle of the shop, a dense and imposing presence, like a shadow that had taken human form. "You decided to stay then," he said, his voice echoing slightly as if coming from a very distant place. Elijah swallowed hard, feeling the heat of the violet flame in his chest. This time, he would not back down. "I am no longer afraid of you." Alden smiled, tilting his head as if analyzing his words. "Afraid? No, Elijah. You were never afraid of me. What you fear is the truth." The floor beneath them seemed to vibrate, and suddenly, the walls of the shop dissolved into mist. Elijah blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in New Orleans. Elijah found himself in a place that seemed to exist between time and space. The sky was an infinity of pulsating stars, and the ground, a dark reflection that stretched as far as the eye could see. On the horizon, figures moved in the penumbra, the wandering shadows sliding smoothly as if waiting for something. Alden turned to Elijah, and this time his eyes were different. They were not just dark, they were empty. "Welcome to what you tried to forget." Suddenly, the shadows began to gather, twisting until they took on human forms. Elijah recognized faces, fragments of his past, people he had left behind. His mother, with tears in her eyes. His stepfather, with a stern gaze. Himself, as a child cowering in fear. The pain came like a blow to the chest. "You never wanted to face them," Alden continued. "You thought you could move on without looking back. But the past always finds a way to catch up with you." Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. It was true. 4 years, he had tried to bury his pains, his traumas, pretending they no longer affected him. But there, facing everything he had tried to ignore, he realized something. He didn't need to run. He needed to accept. When he opened his eyes again, he felt the violet flame burning within him, stronger than ever. And for the first time, he did not shrink from the shadows. He walked toward them. As Elijah advanced, the shadows hesitated. They writhed, as if unsure of what to do in the face of someone who no longer feared them. Alden watched everything with attentive eyes, his fingers clenching into fists. "This is not possible." Elijah extended his hand, and the violet flame expanded around him. The heat spread, dissolving the shadows one by one. But it was not destruction, it was transmutation. Each shadow that disappeared left something behind, fragments of memory, moments of pain transformed into understanding. He saw his mother, not as the frightened and fragile woman he remembered, but as someone who had tried to protect him in the only way she knew how. He saw his stepfather, not as a monster, but as a man broken by his own pains. He saw himself, not as a victim, but as someone who had always had the power to heal. And then he looked at Alden. "You still have a choice," Elijah said, feeling the violet flame within him grow. "The shadows don't have to be your prison." For a moment, something shone in Alden's eyes. But then, he stepped back, his expression hardening. "You think you can save me? I've gone too far." The remaining shadows began to envelop him, pulling him back into the darkness. But before he disappeared, he whispered, "We'll see if you're really ready for what comes next." And then, everything vanished. Elijah opened his eyes and found himself back in the shop. The lights were normal. The world continued as if nothing had happened. But he knew something had changed. He took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. He was no longer bound to the past, but the battle was not yet over, and he was ready to face it. Hashtag consequences and reactions. The next morning, Elijah woke up feeling a different weight in his chest. It was no longer the oppression of the shadows, but a strange lightness, as if something inside him had finally found a way to breathe. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was the echo of what had changed. He got up slowly, feeling the texture of the cold floor under his bare feet. The world seemed more vivid, more real. The scent of fresh coffee coming from the neighboring apartment, the distant hum of the city waking up. Even the breeze that came through the window carried a freshness. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was, because Elijah was no longer the same. As he dressed, he noticed something in the mirror. His eyes. They were still his, but there was a glow there, something that hadn't existed before. It was as if the violet flame now lived within them, pulsing softly, reminding him that he had faced the darkness and won. But the question that haunted him now was, and Alden? He felt that this battle was not over. Alden had disappeared, but his last words still echoed in Elijah's mind. "We'll see if you're really ready for what comes next." Elijah knew that was a warning. He needed to be prepared. Later, as he walked to the antique shop, Elijah found Lyra waiting for him. She was sitting on the edge of a fountain in the small park on the corner, watching the water reflect the morning sunlight. Her light dress swayed with the breeze, and her eyes held that stellar depth that seemed to contain the entire universe. When Elijah approached, Lyra looked up and smiled softly. "You're back." Elijah sat down beside her, letting out a heavy sigh. "I've changed." Lyra nodded, running her fingers over the surface of the water. "Transformation is a path of no return. Now you see the world in a way you can never forget." Elijah was silent for a moment, taking in the scent of the flowers around him, listening to the song of the birds and the distant murmur of the city. "Alden isn't gone, is he?" Lyra sighed, as if she already knew he would ask that. "No. He is still trapped between the two worlds. He feeds on the shadows because he believes there is no other way out." Elijah ran a hand through his hair, feeling the tension in his chest. "So there's still more to do." Lyra looked at him tenderly. "Are you ready?" Elijah didn't need to think. Yes, because this time he knew. The battle was not against Alden. It was against what he himself still needed to free. And he was prepared to face whatever came his way. Elijah felt that something inside him was in transition. It was as if the violet flame was working from within, gently burning away what he no longer needed to carry. In the days that followed, he began to notice subtle changes in himself. Small moments that had previously gone unnoticed now had meaning. The sound of rain on the shop's roof at night. The scent of old wood mixed with incense. The way the sunlight filtered through the windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. He was present, for the first time in years, truly present. But the battle was not yet over. Alden was lurking. On Friday night, Elijah walked home after closing the shop. The streets were quiet, but he felt something watching him. The wind blew strongly, bringing with it a chill that did not come from the cold but from a presence. And then he heard it, a voice whispering his name. "Alden." Elijah stopped in the middle of the street. This time, he would not back down. He turned slowly, and there, under the faint light of the street lamp, Alden appeared. But something about him was different. His eyes were not just empty, there was a conflict in them. "You're changing," Alden said, his voice sounding like a distant echo. Elijah did not look away. "And so can you." Alden laughed, but there was something broken in his laughter. You think it's that simple? You think I never tried? The violet flame within Elijah pulsed softly. You never tried the right way. Alden was silent for a long moment. The wind blew between them, and for an instant, it seemed as if time had stopped. Then, Alden took a step back, his figure slowly dissolving. We'll see how far you can go, Elijah. And then he disappeared. But Elijah knew that was not the end. It was just the beginning of something greater. The next morning, Elijah found Lyra in the antique shop. She was examining an antique mirror, her fingers tracing the golden frame, her eyes reflecting something Elijah couldn't decipher. When he approached, Lyra smiled softly. You faced Alden again. Elijah nodded, but this time it was different. He hesitated. Lyra turned to him, her expression filled with meaning, because he saw something in you that he hadn't seen before. He saw the possibility of his own redemption. Elijah crossed his arms, thoughtful. So he can still be saved? Lyra looked at him as if assessing his determination. If he wants to. Elijah knew that would be the real challenge. Not just defeating Alden, but bringing him back. And he was ready to try. That night, Elijah felt that something was about to happen. The air was charged with electricity, as if the very universe was preparing for an inevitable confrontation. He didn't know where or when Alden would appear again, but he felt the moment was near. The final battle would not be fought just in the physical world. It would be a struggle within Alden's own soul. And Elijah needed to be ready. As he slept, the violet flame took him back to the realm of dreams. But this time, it was not a starlit field or an endless chasm. He was in the center of an ancient cathedral, enveloped by living shadows that moved like waves. On the altar, a single beam of violet light pierced the high ceiling, illuminating a solitary figure, Alden. He was kneeling, his eyes closed, as if engaged in an invisible battle within himself. Elijah took a step forward, feeling the echo of his footsteps resonate on the stone floor. Alden! The man's eyes opened slowly. This time, they were not empty, but they were not filled with hope either. It's too late, Elijah. The violet light flickered, and the shadows around them began to expand, swallowing the pillars of the cathedral, cracking the floor beneath their feet. No, it's not, Elijah said, feeling the violet flame within him grow. The choice is still yours. Alden stood up, his eyes shining with a deep conflict. I don't know how to come back. Elijah extended his hand. Then I'll show you. The cathedral trembled, and the darkness roared around them. The moment of decision was coming, and Elijah knew this would be the last chance. The floor of the cathedral cracked open into deep fissures, revealing an endless void. The wandering shadows swirled around Alden, trying to reclaim him once more. The ceiling dissolved into liquid darkness, as if time itself was collapsing. Elijah did not retreat. This time, he would not run. The violet flame within him pulsed, growing, expanding in waves of heat and light. He was ready for the final battle, not against Alden, but against the darkness that imprisoned him. You don't have to be this. Elijah's voice cut through the chaos around them. You still have a choice. Alden stood in the center of the shadow storm, his eyes flickering between the void and a deeper glow. Hope, regret. I've gone too far. His voice was a ragged whisper. There is no too far. There is only now. The shadows roared in response, writhing around Alden, pulling him back. It was the final test, and Elijah knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, Elijah ran toward Alden and dove into the midst of the shadows. The world around him became a whirlwind of broken memories, echoes of pain and guilt. It was here that Alden was trapped, a labyrinth with no exit, made of his own wounds. Elijah saw flashes of Alden's past, The first time he touched the violet flame, the first time he felt fear of his own power, the moment he chose to surrender to the shadows. But he also saw something more. Alden never wanted to be consumed by the darkness. He simply believed he no longer deserved the light. Weeks had passed since that last night in the antique shop, but for Elijah, it felt like a lifetime had unfolded in so little time. New Orleans remained the same. The streets vibrated with music and stories. The scent of coffee and incense still hung in the air, and the Mississippi River flowed peacefully. But Elijah was no longer the same. He walked the streets without the weight of before, feeling the living energy around him. Every small detail, the warm touch of the sun, the cold of the breeze, the murmur of the leaves, seemed part of something greater. Alden had chosen to stay. He didn't know exactly how to rebuild his life, but he was willing to try. Now, he visited the antique shop frequently, learning about the world he had left behind, rediscovering himself. Lyra, on the other hand, had disappeared as mysteriously as she had appeared. But Elijah knew she was never truly far away. One night, looking up at the sky, he saw a single star pulsing with an intense violet glow. And he smiled, because now he understood. The light had always been there. It was just a matter of learning to see it. Elijah's journey reminds us that we all carry our own shadows, memories, fears, pains from the past. But the shadows do not exist to imprison us. They exist to be illuminated. Just as he found the strength to face the darkness within himself, we too can transform our pains into learning, our fears into courage, and our losses into growth. The violet flame is a symbol of this transformation, a reminder that healing always begins from within. And now I ask you, what do you still need to free? The light has always been with you. All you have to do is choose to see it. In this magical and transformative story, we follow Elijah on his journey of healing and redemption, guided by the violet flame. He confronted shadows from his past, learned to accept his pains, and by illuminating his deepest memories, discovered the power to transmute darkness into light. By freeing himself, he also brought freedom to Alden, proving that transformation is not merely personal but can touch and change those around us. This narrative reminds us that we all carry shadows, fears, traumas, or regrets that insist on holding us back. But these shadows exist to be illuminated. They are invitations to delve deeper into our own souls and find the strength needed to move forward. Do you feel there is something from your past that still binds you? How do you deal with it? If you could revisit a moment in your life to find healing, which moment would it be? Do you believe everyone has the capacity to transform pain into learning? How has this already happened in your life? If this story resonated with you, leave your comment below. Share. Which shadow are you ready to illuminate? Use the energy of the violet flame as a guide to bring this healing light into your life. Remember, we are not here to erase the past, but to re-signify it, turning our scars into symbols of strength. The journey doesn't end here. Choose one of the videos on the screen to continue exploring themes of self-discovery, growth, and transformation. Each step we take towards our true essence brings us closer to who we really are. Finally, remember, the light has always been with you. You just need to choose to pick it up. And if at this moment you are in a deep sleep, allow the violet flame to work in your subconscious, transmuting dense energies while you rest. May this night be blessed with dreams of healing and renewal. Until next time, and may your light continue to shine brightly.